But I recently got this.
Oh, that's my fault. That's my fault.
Somebody unmute the thing.
All right. Oh, okay. We'll back it up.
Thanks, Sean.
This is awesome.
How it is? No, you, that's.
Well, someone.
Need to switch off.
Okay.
What do I need to switch? I'm switched off.
Everybody's sounds off, everybody's should be except for that.
Yours as well.
Mine's off.
Yeah, now it's.
Okay, now we're fine. Good. Okay, so leave your microphones muted, okay, but the main one is good. Can you hear us now? Can you hear us?
Yeah, Marine is nodding.
Okay, all right, so go ahead, Terry, sorry.
That's good. This is all new layout and new thinking today, so we can expect a few hiccups. I was saying that I'll be forever grateful to Doctors John Swinton and Harriet Mark for their publication, Practical Theology and Qualitative Research, because that volume both opened up and held my research together, right through to the reorganization of my thesis after my Viva. They note that practical theology is a fundamentally missiological discipline, whose aim is not simply to understand the world, but also to change it. And their model proposes a way of engaging the actor agents of development in the field. And their method thus involves consciousness raising via a process of exploring the world through a theological lens. They explain, practical theology seeks to explore the complex theological and practical dynamics of particular situations in order to enable the development of a transformative and illuminating understanding of what is going on within these situations. And so I have to say that
Okay, that doesn't advance yet. I mean, the same thing. You gotta go screen share and then re-share. Click on screen share, the green button.
what must I do now?
Okay, click on that. Okay, on your screen. No, this one. I'll see it.
Oh, this one.
Oh, yeah, right. Then click on this.
Yes, so we meant to be recording?
Yes. Yeah, click on that one. Double click. There you go. Now it's on.
Right now. Nope, still jammed. Okay. I just wanted to move my slideshow forward now.
All right, let's go again. Go to screen share.
I think you need to stop screen sharing here first.
Okay, go up to this one.
Should
Stop it.
Okay, so stop screen share. Okay, yeah, come back down here. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so come back to your screen here. All right, and come to and stop share. Click here. Okay, to that. All right, there. Now hit share. And then go to this one right here. Like what? Now try it.
Assistance.
Okay, the other thing that you can do is stop sharing. Well, now this is okay. Go to stop share again. Stop share here. Stop share. Okay, so now on your desktop, open up your presentation and just go to slide presentation. Sorry for the delay. So yeah, close this. Or escape.
This is what I'll do, jammed up.
I don't know. Damon, why don't you come around and take a look at it? We can't get his. How do you do force? Oops.
You want to see your turn off your microphone.
No,
my flash.
You know, when he needs to get it out.
That's the days of overhead
It's
projectors.
slides.
Oh, there it is.
See, it's not, he needs to get out of his mouth. Needs to close his mouth.
There we go. There we go.
There we go. Okay. All right, there we go.
Wait, let's try it.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
So, as just a second. Right. So as I mentioned earlier, so I'm going to talk about my highlights and give you some reminders of artisanal gold mining in Migori. And I'm going to talk about 3 prongs of change for mining God's way: charity approach, an NGO approach, and finally as an enterprise. So I'll talk about these things as we go along. So OCMS, reflections on some of the learning highlights for me were, and I'm on practical theology now, and just sharing a little bit about that, how important practical theology was. So they talk about a 4-stage process. This is Swinton and Mark, 4-stage process of practical theology. Firstly, you need to study the current praxis at the location. And so that obviously meant many weeks and months of field work, just watching artisanal miners, what they do, how they do it, what their thinking is, interviewing. There was a lot of field work. I took hundreds of photographs, video clips, as well as taping recordings of interviews. So all of that went on over many months. And the next thing is methods of cultural or contextual analysis. Try and develop a deeper understanding of the situation dynamics. And so what they want us to do in practical theology at this point is to try and understand the praxis in its context, not just observe and walk away, not just looking at it through a telescope or a microscope, but interacting with the actors and the agents in the situation as close as one can. And so it's about reading of the particular situation, and that requires a hermeneutical task according to them. So it's about understanding what the people are thinking as well as what they are doing, and that's why the interviewing is so important, getting people to express as much as possible what is behind the behavior, behind the visible activity. And that was, they call that theological listening. That's to ask the questions in a way that people feel comfortable to express their thoughts from a Christian or theological perspective, which is unusual in a lot of anthropological research into artisanal mining, where people tend to just want to know kind of what's going on and why is it going on. But to go to the next level of understanding why, particularly from a Christian perspective, did allow me to get some very interesting information from my informants. The third step then is the theological reflection. It's to take what you've learned now about the situation, the practices and the thinking, and then try and get a theological framework to now come back and interpret all of this from a biblical or theological perspective. And that, of course, required me to do a lot of reading in both theology and Old Testament and New Testament. And it took a long time again for me to quite work out what that theological reading should be. But eventually, even before the final revelation in 2018, I knew it had to do with justice. So I did a lot of reading in this wonderful library on different aspects of justice and theology, which was very, very helpful. Tom did mention that earlier. And then finally, stage 4 is formulating revised practices. And that's what I'm going to share with you at the end of the lecture, how I'm going ahead with trying to formulate revised practices. So that was the first big learning for me, was the whole idea of practical theology, what it meant and how it could be applied to this world. The second big learning curve for me, and there's some pretty big words there, but it really has to do with these two words, hermeneutics and culture. And these words were used a lot by Swinton and Mowat, and they were indicating that you really do need to get a handle on these ideas. What is meant by culture, if you're going to be looking at people in a foreign culture, which I was doing, and then how are you going to interpret this? What are the hermeneutics here that you are going to use? And so I had come across a writer called Geert Hofstede, a Dutchman who had written on culture, and he had proposed a very simple approach where culture was made up of two things, what you can see and what's behind what you can see. And I then broke that down into further understanding. So my first hidden thing was worldview. At the very basics, what do we take to be real in our view of the world? This is both the basis and the sum of our beliefs. It is known in philosophical and scientific terms as our paradigm, which is a framework for ideas, a distinct set of concepts or thought patterns. A typical example would be the reality of dreams in different cultures. Some cultures, particularly the Islamic cultures, take dreams very seriously. There's a long list of Muslims who've been converted to Christianity because Jesus revealed himself to them in a dream, and they take it very seriously. Other cultures take dreams as sort of just kind of an aberration of sleep and you can just ignore your dreams and so on. So that's just one example of what is real. The second level then are beliefs about the universe, God, religion, life after death, and so on. And that I'm saying is not the entire worldview. Our worldview is more encompassing than that. But within that worldview, there are our beliefs that can be regarded as socio-religioso, whatever, cultural beliefs. And then thirdly, built on top of those two are our values. What do we value most as people, as cultures? And so those three things, worldview, beliefs, and values, are hidden, and they can only be expressed in discussion. You can't get those just by watching people at work, which is what I was doing. And so I had to work quite hard at letting my informants know that I was very keen for them to be open and honest as much as they could at that level of their thinking, worldview, beliefs, and values. And I did find some very interesting information from that. Of course, the next one then is behavior. And here we have family and courtship and worship and rituals and governance and society, and all the apparent differences between our cultures are then found in our behaviors. And then the very last thing is our material culture, our artifacts, religious symbols, art, food, medicines, etc. And this is the stuff of archaeologists, collectors, and museums. And so we often think of culture just simply being our material culture. But Hofstede and other thinkers took it all the way back, and then I kind of integrated that together, those 5 levels of understanding culture. And we can only observe the latter two, and then we have to ask about the rest. You may have heard the expression, values are not taught, they are caught. And so you've got to try and catch people's values. They're not just going to become clear. I'm now a proud grandfather of 5 grandchildren. I'm watching just how they absorb the culture in which they have been born. It's amazing. And the fact that my kids are being born here in England or in North America, for example, before 2 years old, they're already grabbing a cell phone and trying to swipe the pictures because they've seen their parents swiping the pictures. And it's just an amazing thing that these kids have picked this up at such an early age. Even before they can talk, they're already trying to swipe the phone. And it seems hell hath no fury like a toddler who doesn't get to push the button at the end of a conversation. That little red button. The toddler's got to push that, or else my daughter has to phone me back again to say, Hope wants to push the button, Dad. And it's just amazing how we just are thrown into our culture, pick everything up from birth, and perhaps even before birth, I don't know. And that is the milieu in which we are born and in which we begin to fathom out the world. And so philosophical hermeneutics is trying to save us. It's saying everything out there is real, but the moment it comes through our 5 senses and into our brains, we are already interpreting what's coming into our mind. You cannot avoid that interpretation. It's right at the beginning of understanding and reasoning, hence the word philosophical. Hermeneutics, of course, we all know from Christianity and Bible studies and hermeneutics and translation. But Gadamer and Grondin and these guys who are trying to bring this way of thinking forward are saying, no, it's much deeper than we realize. It's the way we reason, it's the way we understand. Initially, we can do nothing about it. We simply absorb it from the culture we are in. And so I found philosophical hermeneutics to be incredibly helpful when sitting out there and trying to listen to people and to then write up my thesis. And so it was a great value for me, philosophical hermeneutics. And then the third great learning for me was the subject of ordinary theology. So we've talked about practical theology. But ordinary theology is just this amazing subject by Astley and others that each of us has our own ordinary theology. We may have been theologically trained, we may understand some things, but as well as all of that, we have our own ordinary theologies. It's just the way we understand our Christianity, the Bible, God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the way we kind of just process that in our daily lives is called ordinary theology. And it's the category used for articulations by Christian artisanal miners in the context of their situation. It allows people to express in their own words their feelings, relationships, and actions, especially, and this is their quote, I'm quoting them, quoting Ashley now, their values, ideas, beliefs, and understanding. And ordinary theology takes this seriously. And it occurs within normal conversation, observations that are alert, empathetic, and intelligent. And so I found that this concept of ordinary theology helped me immensely when I was out doing my research. And in fact, it has helped me ever since. It's a life skill for me now. And that's why I can put the word faith in there. Ordinary theology is particularly about Christians. Ordinary faith is a much more universal thing. That all humans have some kind of a faith, even if it's faith in atheism. And there are very few highly trained philosophical atheists out there. Most of the atheists you meet have just got an ordinary atheism, an ordinary faith in atheism. And so it was very helpful for me to be able to work with people and understanding that things are much more simple and easier than we like to think. We like to overcomplicate things. And that skill of understanding ordinary theology, ordinary philosophy, ordinary faith helps even now. So I've just been reading 2 books that I've talked with you as a sample. There's this one called Mind is the Ride, it's subtitled A Journey Through Cycling and Philosophy. So not only am I reading this and looking at the author's ordinary philosophy, but I'm also realizing that I'm just reading it through my own ordinary philosophy. So it's a two-way thing. It's what he's working with and writing, and it's what I'm working with in my understanding. And a bit more complicated, a brand new book on physics that's been written, and I'll just read. The author delivers an enlightening tour of physics, religion, and philosophy, yielding a monistic vision of fundamental reality as a vast unified whole. Gosh, these are big words. But even I, with my ordinary understanding of philosophy, can work through this book. Well, that's a bit of a struggle. I've only got a quarter of the book. So it's not been that easy to read. But very liberating understanding of life, these 3 concepts that I learned here at OCMS. And I'm very grateful for OCMS for bringing me along this path. Now, you've heard mention of the downloads of my thesis. I thought I would encourage students at OCMS to realize that I've got nearly 300 downloads on my thesis now from Middlesex University. And for reasons that are completely unknown to me, there was a surge in February of people wanting to download my thesis. I only wish I had $10 for every thesis. Boy, I'd do my campaign.
It's good beer money.
Yeah. Anyway, just say, guys, you don't know where it's going to go to. You do your research, you write your thesis, and you lodge it into the system, and there you go. And so it's just quietly going along. And there's no ways this is all downloaded by Christians, as Tom was saying earlier. There's got to be some secular interest in this world as well. What does mining God's way look like? So there we are. Now let's have a quick look at artisanal gold mining and the world in which I'm trying to do my thing. So first of all, what we've got here is some women who are just digging in the soil. That's what they do. And they're trying to find gold-bearing soils. And you can see the simple technology, hose and plastic basins. Then I'm going to hope that I can work this video clip. Yes, there we go. It's showing a gentleman about to descend down a shaft. He's sitting on the edge of a rope on a stick, and his mate is lowering him down the shaft, and he's going down to the bottom of the shaft to continue doing some shaft sinking and getting down towards the ore body a bit lower down. So you can see how incredibly dangerous this world is. Fortunately, when I went underground, I didn't travel on the edge of a rope. You'll see on the picture next to that a lattice framework, and I was able to climb down the mines. I went down on those timbers that you can see that are lining the shaft. So there we are, there the timbers are there. and I was able to climb down using those. You can see all these sacks of ore that have been raised from the mine, and they've been attached to the rope where the gentleman was being lowered, and they get hauled up by these ropes and put to one side, ready for milling. The guy you can see holding the book and holding his hat is Simon Okoyo. He's an Anglican minister that I'm supporting, and we're very involved with Miner to Miner Ministries out there in Kenya. And the gentleman with the blue shirt next to him owns a milling center. So great team of people out there. Again, very quickly, we'll just have a look at this video clip. What happens to the sack? It gets dumped into the crusher, and you can see the lady dumping rock into the crusher. Then the next picture, hopefully, will be showing you how the crushers work. There's a motor with a pulley, a V-belt that goes on to the axle, and the axle rotates the crusher. And here's another one in the same building. You can see all the stones in the sacks, which are waiting to be crushed or milled, to be more accurate, in these ball mills, which spin around and reduce the rock to powder. And then finally, this picture will show you what happens. You can see the dust already. They've opened the cover of the crusher, and you'll see the dust pouring out from within the crusher now. And that dust has got the gold bearer. It's now crushed fine enough for the particles of gold to be liberated. So that's the last stage in this part. So John Asembo and his wife own this facility, just to give you a sense of what I mean by a central facility. Right. Let's see what else we can do here. Here we go. Now, the powder then is sluiced. And what we have here is a picture of a sluice. It's an inclined board on which there's a blanket. And on that blanket, and then the powder is mixed with water and runs down that sloping board. And you'll see it again in a moment. And the heavy gold particles are trapped in the sacking or in the blanket that's on the board. And the mud flows off the edge of the sluice into a hole, and you can see the mud in the hole in the bottom of the sluice in the next picture. And if I can get that to work, you'll see that in a moment. So there's the gentleman busy shoveling the mud out. There's the sluice. There's the sack on which the gold particles were trapped. And that's part of the messy process of getting the gold out from the ore. The next stage are these pictures here showing these ladies, and the sacks are then washed into these basins, and then from the basins, the slurry is poured into a pan, and there you can see the lady holding a pan. Right there, you can see it's a different shape, and it's a pan, and she's also holding a cloth, and I'll explain that in a moment, I hope. Let's see if we can get there. Right now, inside the pan, this photo shows you mercury. And what happens is that mercury is poured into the pan, and then the mercury amalgams with the gold particles and pulls them all together. Then that ball of mercury and gold is then squeezed in the cloth, which you can see in the center picture, a lady holding a cloth in which the gold and mercury is squeezed, and the free mercury comes out and is used again, and the mercury and the gold amalgam then becomes this bead. So you can see that bead of gold right there. Now, you may think all this is an awful lot of effort for awfully little reward. But if you think about the price of gold, if you had one about the size of a cell phone amount of gold, that would be a kilogram. And right now, a kilogram is trading at about 51,000 pounds. So that means a gram of gold is worth $51. That lady is probably holding half a gram of gold in that bead, give or take, maybe 4/10 of gold. And so you're looking at 25 pounds in money in her hand right there. And in Africa, that's good money. That's good money, thank you very much. When you're on $1 a day or less or whatever you're stretching out, suddenly after a hard day's work, and it's hard work as you've seen, you can pull out a sizable amount of livelihood to feed your family. And so this process that I've been sharing with you. It can be called poverty-driven mining, and I just wanted to show you those particular that information that you can see there. The mercury I just mentioned accounts for a huge amount of the mercury emissions into our atmosphere. Once it's done, there is a lot of deforestation because of these processes right now. There's at least 1 million children engaged in one way or another in this process, in this hazardous work. 80% of this mining is either legal or illegal or semi-legal. And of course, as you can imagine, there's high rates of fatalities in this: drug abuse, domestic abuse, violence, etc. And so this poverty-driven mining, while it provides a very real livelihood for a lot of people, there are millions who get their livelihood from this. It has a great cost. It has a great cost. So let's just see if I can get us the next slide. Don't tell me we've jammed again after all this good effort. Let's see if I can do it. Oh, there we go. Right. And so at least 41 million people around the world are working in this world. It's concentrated obviously in the developing nations, and you can see that spread is in some of the most ecologically sensitive parts of the world, Amazon jungle, the Congo jungle, right through to very important Southeast Asia, South Asia, and across into China. It accounts for 10 to 20% of the world's gold, 90% of the world's colored gems, including diamonds. You've all heard of blood diamonds, and 90% of the minerals in your phone, cobalt and lithium included. And so it is just not going to end. As long as humans want gold, pretty stones for engagement rings and so on, and jewelry, and want to keep using cell phones, this is not going to go away in the near future. And so how do we break this? Well, we need to think about these 4 areas: economic, environmental, social, and spiritual, which is what Tom was referring to earlier. And my research then zeroed in on those 4 areas for my various chapters, looked at each one of these things closely. And to break these underlying cycles of poverty, we need to work on community enterprise, community relationships, pastoral support, and working practices. And I've tended to zero in so far, this whole conversation on working practices, but all these other things are enmeshed and a part of the world we're trying to get into. Now, to manage change in behavior, we need to do 3 important things. There's 3 important principles, and this is, again, from a very important publication called The Behavior Change Wheel. And what the authors are saying is that you will never motivate or create change unless the following things are in place. Motivation. People are motivated to change. Secondly, capacity or capability. Are they capable of change? If they haven't got the capability, they're not going to change. And finally, opportunity. Are the opportunities there to reward and sustain that change? Because if there's no opportunities, we won't get the essential changes that we're looking for in behavior. And then I've just quickly picked up that slide, and you can see that's the behavior change wheel. This is the literature that I'm referring to. And you can see in the middle again, these 3 big words: capability, opportunity, and motivation. And so my attempts at thinking through this whole thing is that we're not going to change anything unless everything we try to do includes these 3 very important principles: capability, opportunity, and motivation. Doesn't matter where you start on the wheel of change, at some point or other you need to address these 3. And then you can see, like all wheels, it spirals out and gets more and more complicated as you go along. Right. So how am I approaching the sector? Well, in 3 ways. I've mentioned earlier: charity, NGO, and enterprise. And so some of you may remember from my time here, I'm a trustee of the International Miners Mission. They very kindly have picked me up as a project within the International Miners Mission, and they've been helping me with fundraising and funding money out to Kenya in particular. That's where the funding for miner to miner ministry has come from. That's where the work that we are doing in Kenya. and it has certain immediate help gains. It's how can I say this? It's sensitizing people to the idea that God can be involved in their daily lives, in their livelihoods. And so the work I've done so far and am continuing to do comes out of charity money. And we are doing quite well in raising funds through charity. Not a lot, but a few £1,000s every few months comes in, and I can then spend that in Kenya. And that's very helpful. The second area is as an NGO, and there's been an organization in Zimbabwe that's quite famous called Farming God's Way. You can see where I got my name from. And they then are now called Foundations for Farming in Zimbabwe, and they are pursuing looking after Christian agricultural-based practices in Zimbabwe. Out of the blue, perhaps they downloaded my thesis, I don't know, but I got a phone call from the biggest NGO in the sector about 2 months ago, called the Artisanal Gold Council.
Oh,
And I got a phone call from them saying, Terry, we are thinking about going to Zimbabwe in late May, early June. Would you be so kind as to set up a visit for us? And I'd never spoken to them. I did not know them. They did not know me. They tracked me down through LinkedIn, I suppose, once they discovered who I was. And so I said, sure, this I can do. I can't join you, but I can set up a visit for you. And you may remember me speaking last year about the Cotton Training Center and the idea of having a combined agricultural and artisanal mining training center from a Christian perspective with training pastors in these sectors. And so that Cotton Training Center remains an opportunity. And the Artisanal Gold Council people went there while they were in Zimbabwe. It's about a 2-hour drive out of Harare. And they did a couple of other things that I suggested, but they went to the Cotton Training Center and came back very encouraged that this could be done and very encouraging. And in fact, the boss said, looks like you need about $3 million to get this whole show on the road. Help. Yeah, okay, whatever. And he said, I think we can help you get towards that kind of money. So, I mean, this is incredible. This is where we go from conversation and discussion to reality is another story. We all know about pledges when it comes to fundraising, but certainly the number was well beyond my thinking. The response was well beyond my thinking, and now they've gone back again to Canada, and apparently the guys they're writing a report which I haven't seen yet. But
Are these guys believers?
no, straight secular organization. Works closely with the United Nations, the World Bank, that sort of thing. So they're very much linked into high money, high power.
Right.
They're the biggest NGO in the sector. And as I say, all secular. So there we go. And so at the moment, we are a project within Foundations for Farming in Zimbabwe. Of course, I wonder, are you an entity? Are you registered? Have you got accounts and banking? And said, no, not yet. But Foundations for Farming are looking after us in Zimbabwe. So we'll see. It's very exciting, but we all know about NGO money. It doesn't always come through the way one would like it to. Lots of promises, lots of things, but it comes with strings attached. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't come without strings attached. And then finally, there's an opportunity, I believe, for a business enterprise. Now, you saw a picture of John Asembo earlier, standing at the mine site. You saw his equipment. And again, out of the blue, we get a phone call, a communication from a Christian organization called 10COM. That stands for the Enterprise Network Community. And it's all run by Christians, all Christian enterprises, Christian businesses who want to make a difference through business in alleviating poverty. And so I spoke to the boss of that, Jerry Marshall, who told me that he was on his way to Kenya to look at other charity works that they're involved in, other business enterprises they're involved in, and he would like to visit a artisanal gold mine while he was in Kenya. And I said, sure, man, this we can do. And so I set him up to meet up with John and Simon, the two guys you saw earlier, And he spent a day with them and his team, not just him, but a whole team of guys, went down to Migori and spent a day with them. And I didn't get immediate feedback, but I thought, well, that's fine. And then I phoned Jerry on his return about 10 days ago now. And I said to Jerry, so what do you think? Do you think there is a hope of a business enterprise out here? Or do you think it's too far dangerous and too far gone and too risky or what? He said, no, Jerry, I do believe that we can find the right kind of money to the right kind of organization to make an enterprise out on these mines. A for-profit, but a strong, they use these letters now, ESG, strong economic, social governance, high risk operation. And he said he's sure that we can get the right funding into an enterprise to start that. And of course, the main link there then is mechanization to remove mercury. So, and then finally, some of you may have heard of a friend of mine called Josh Reed. Josh Reed is busy doing some apps on cell phones and on the internet, and he's trying to get together another enterprise to help artisanal miners through their cell phones and bring and sensitize them into being better miners and so on. So we'll see how that goes. And so just as I finish now, just 3 pictures to end with. Number 1, there's Esther holding her little tiny bead of gold, if you can see it. And a lovely lady, small amount of money, as I say, that's probably only worth about 10, 15 pounds, that bead of gold that she's holding there. It's got mercury with it. There you can see Simon holding, yes, thank you, David Cranston, the book Mining God's Way, produced and published here by Regnum. Thank you, OCMS. And Simon's got his copy, that's his good wife. And he's our Anglican minister out there. And he was very committed, miner to miner ministries. And then finally, I've had some influence with an organization called Appropriate Process Technologies in South Africa. And they have, thanks to my kind of pressure, I suppose is a good word, have taken some of their equipment and found a way of mounting it onto motorcycle trailers, as you can see there, and trying to make it more mobile. And I've said to them, guys, you've got great equipment, but nobody can carry it around. It's too heavy. You know, it can't fit on a wheelbarrow. Is there some way it can be towed with a motorbike and we can get it out to the site? And these splintered sites, these atomized sites of mining. And they've come up with this. Now, it's still a bit heavy for me. They want a quad bike here. No quad bikes in Kenya. Motorbikes everywhere, no quad bikes. So we're still working towards getting this technology made more appropriate. So there we are then. That's my presentation. Thank you for your time. I'm now happy to take questions, comments, and suggestions.
Okay. And for those of you online, if you want a question or a comment, at the bottom of your screen is a reaction button, and you can push that and then have a hand go up. As chair, I have the privilege of asking the first question or comment. I was really fascinated by what you had to say, Brett, when you said, "Oh, were these Christians?" And I think that's a real significant point here, because Terry's thesis has now been downloaded over 300 times. Most likely, not all of these are Christians who are interested in this research. But I want you, Terry, to think about a moment. It was really important for me in my tenure here. It was during his transfer panel, and Terry was really frustrated because he had a main supervisor who really wasn't really a good supervisor. He was a brilliant mining scholar, but Terry would come and go, "I don't think he's interested. He's just not interested in theology. He just wants a straight ahead mining thesis." And so I just thought maybe I would give him. So anyway, we come down, have the transfer panel, and he's sitting there. We go through the whole thing, and then the guy goes, "You know, the reason I got involved with this is the God thing." There's the Christian faith part. And so what I want you to talk about is what went through your mind. I mean, this guy didn't always pan out to be true gold as that.
Yeah.
But there's the thing about your thesis that I think captures the essence of this place. And what was that for you? What was that process where they really are interested in what we're doing, and why?
Well, thanks, Tom. That is a very good question. And of course, there's an encyclopedia of answers, so I have to kind of hold it down. But yes, there's this huge tension within Christianity in the world, is that we want to honor Jesus, we want to be salt and light in the world, and it's often very difficult to see how we can overcome the tension between honoring Jesus and being of use in the world, salt and light in the world. And I have to be honest, there were times when I thought, OCM, even after starting here, this is not the right place. I need to go to Gavin's University, which is down the road here in Guildford, at the University of Surrey, and I need to be under Gavin, my supervisor. And then I would kind of have other moments. I thought, no, that's not the right answer. I need to be at OCMS because I'm trying to honor God, and I need to think this whole thing through from a theological perspective. And that tension remained, and I was popping between the two. And then when the time came to write my first draft of my thesis for the transfer panel, I pretty much had abandoned the theological side of things. It was almost an appendix or a kind of final thing. And then that supervisor stunned me and the group by saying, well, what happened to Jesus, man? Go to. And as Tom said, it was a setback and a step forward in exactly the same moment. Okay, all right. So maybe the secular world is looking for something that is different, something that may break the impasse of the situation in which the world finds itself. And so that was very encouraging for me to then go forward. But again, the word justice is another good word between Christianity and the world. The world is and it's increasingly so, it seems. The word justice is coming up everywhere in the world's media at the moment. And of course, it's usually the negative, injustice. Too much injustice. There's environmental injustice, economic injustice, social injustice. And yet the world is kind of hovering around the fact that all this injustice is not being solved in a way that everybody would like. And we Christians have this wonderful God and this wonderful book, the books, the Old and New Testaments, the Hebrew and the Christian Bibles, which are just packed with ideas of justice. And we just have to get there and find ways of integrating those ideas of justice with the world, if that's what our calling is. Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Okay, before we go in the room, I want to go up to Dr. Alfred. Dr. Alfred, would you unmute and ask your question?
Yes, indeed. Warmest greetings from Dodoma, central part of Tanzania here. And thank you very much for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. I just wanted to ask Terry about what would he say about the centrality of people or community in all that he has been doing, be it, for example, when he's speaking about poverty, the issue of pastoral care, money from gold, the continent of Africa. How did you locate people? How would you say people really are talking about people and the sense of community in all this mining business? I don't know whether I'm clear here, but I wanted to know how would you locate people and how do people understand people in terms of mining?
Again, a very good question. And you're straight into the whole world of cross-cultural ways of seeing things, which is why the word culture featured earlier in my talk. Certainly the West is very hung up on individualism and individual rights, human rights, and individual approaches. My experience, both growing up in Africa and particularly doing this research in Africa again, is that the community is central to the people's understanding. And all of those mines that you saw, all the times you see people, they're always together. There's always a group of people on the mine, in the mine, underground. They're all together on surface. They're all together in the milling area. And as soon as a researcher like me pops up, you're not alone. People just gather around, like, who's this guy? What's he doing in our community? And so you simply cannot avoid the whole concept of community in Africa. And I'm very mindful of that. And a lot of the work I'm trying to get to from where I am now is to keep community absolutely centered. And that's why that one slide I showed you had the word community repeated at least 4 times in that slide. No, so community is, I think, is the only way forward in this world. Yeah.
David.
So Terry, I was an absolute joy to do your thesis and make it into a mini book. What about this mercury business and the new thing that was developed? Who developed that, and what's the chances of getting rid of mercury?
Thanks. And that exactly is the motorbike mounted trailer piece of equipment that I featured. I was the first person to take that equipment into the artisanal gold mining sector. And so that's why I have some credibility with that company. And so unfortunately, it remains quite expensive. And the whole unit that's only one part of a unit to remove mercury. The whole unit, from crushing to remove the terrible crushing that you've seen in the pictures earlier, the noise and the dust and the pollution, to start at the crushing to go right through to mercury free. A unit is going to cost in the region of about 15 to 20,000 pounds. And that's beyond the reach of the average artisanal mining community. And so again, I've been trying to find ways of reducing those costs and finding ways of making it more mobile. So you don't just dump it in the middle of a place and then hope the miners bring their stuff to you, but we still try and keep it in transportable equipment that it can go to different mining centers and do the work, mercury free. But it's critical that it's mercury free, David. That was the whole point of that chapter on ecological creation care.
And who developed that? Did you develop that? Or...
No, it was developed by a company in Harare, by friends of mine. But they developed it for another level, small scale mining, and I adapted it and have tried to adapt it for artisanal scale mining, which is another level lower.
Israel, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Terry. Thank you very much for the lecture. I just wanted to know a little bit about the area of safety, because the mining experience in continents like Africa and Latin America has been, it is a very dangerous enterprise, especially for people who are defenseless. Have you seen something of the solution to improve the safety of people involved? Many times in Peru, for example, where I come from, it is something like, which is called illegal mining, and they are used by the mafia organizations, and politically also it's very difficult to do something to make changes. And I see that you, in a way, through your work, want to promote ways of knowing how to change the situation. So in the issue of safety, have you seen something?
Yeah, sadly, as I showed that video, I specifically didn't censor that video, was to show you just how unsafe the present situation is. That video was just a couple of weeks ago for me, for this presentation and updating me. And so sadly, safety is a big issue in this world. The people, when you talk to them, are aware of the unsafe practices, but it's the usual story. We don't know how to do it any other way. We've got no money on how to do it any other way. No one's trained us how to do it any other way. We don't have the equipment how to do it any other way. And so at best, what you will get is personal protective equipment. And you might have seen in some of my pictures, people wearing hard hats and high-vis jackets and using gloves. And that is the sort of level of safety that is most people will understand. But what you're talking about, what I understand, are the coffins that I showed a picture of the coffins. People get killed in this world. And that That's just going to require support and teams on the ground helping these miners to do things more safely. It cannot be prescribed. It cannot be done through videos or anything. It has to be done through programs like Train the Trainer. And so once this cotton training center is moving in Zimbabwe, we are hoping to use that as a training center to train trainers who will then go back to the mines and teach better safety practices. And that's the only hope we have. It's so big that no, you can't, even the inspectors of mines in countries can't get out to these places. If we can do it, it has to be a kind of from a central training area out to the mines. Yeah, but thanks, good question.
Thanks, Terry. I'm really glad that I was actually part of this journey that we were on together, trying to get the thesis done and us all trying to grapple with these ideas. And I'm thrilled to see the impact it's having, especially overseas. My question, Terry, is that these days there's fair trade tomatoes, fair trade bananas, fair trade chocolate, food, everything. And the consumers are made aware of what workers go through and the damage not only to the community and to the individual's health and safety wise, but also to the environment. And it seems that you've had some success in the specialist areas. But the thing is, gold is consumed by people like me, you know, and it's a luxury. Okay, culturally, gold isn't a luxury in my Indian culture, it's a necessity. But even so, how can you make consumers and the people, I mean, there's blood diamonds, we saw films like that. How can you make consumers aware of the risks that are taken, the unfair practices, the if you like, the abuse of the soil, the land, and the people, the environment, to get luxury products such as gold or cell phone batteries or whatever to people like me? Because I didn't know that. I had no idea that people struggled and suffered so much just so that I could have a diamond ring or I could have a gold necklace.
Again, thank you, Usha. A very deep question, and it is taxing the minds of huge amounts of people, authorities in this world, whether it's the United Nations, UNESCO, UNEP, environmental program, whether it's the World Bank's extractive industries branch, whether it is EITI, Extractive Industries Transparency International. There are huge numbers. Fair trade, you just mentioned yourself, whether it's fair trade here, Swiss Better Gold in Switzerland, Alliance for Responsible Mining in South America, mercury-free mining in North America. There are huge numbers of NGOs springing up, each of whom is grappling with this, and each of whom is hoping that somehow, when there's enough agitation or activation, that it will spill over into the general media, but it hasn't yet. I don't quite know why mining, the general attitude to in the media is mining should just be banned over and done with, which is not a solution at all, and will never happen as long as people need something that can't be grown. And so anything that is not grown must be mined. And everything that you can see around you that hasn't been grown was mined or is now being recycled from original mining. And so it's just a matter of hope, I guess, that eventually enough momentum will be gathered by all these various NGOs and organizations that will then spill over into the media. The trouble with mining and minerals is that it's generally small, bulk, high value items, chocolate, tomatoes, firewood, cotton, all the things you've mentioned earlier. It's much easier to trace those things. It's much easier to find those sources and to go audit those sources and say, right, this cotton is grown here, this tea is grown here, this coffee is grown here, let's go and audit them and see that they're doing right practices. And then that then trickles back up the supply chain to an ethical consumer. The trouble with the world I'm in is that you can't really track those supply chains back to educate the consumer. Gold, for example, all ends up in a smelter, a refinery somewhere, and then it just becomes gold. You can't track it anymore. There's no provenance where gold is concerned, unless you start at the site, which is what we're hoping to do, and then build our own supply chain out. But that'll be a tiny fraction.
Mark?
When we're talking about safety, I just want to know if you know about the attitude of the workers in terms of safety. Because in my place, for example, we were building our college building, it's 6-7 stories high. And they do work without helmets, without shoes, and without harness. And if you bring them a harness and helmet, they almost laugh at it. They say, we've done this so many times. We don't need this. So instead of thinking of safety, they think they are macho or whatever, manly, because they do it without that. They just don't need it. And many times they don't use it even when you give it to them. That's one thing. The other thing is, talking about machine, you showed the bike and the machinery. Is there a plan for getting more machinery there? And if so, how efficient they are? And how do they affect the employment? Does it happen that when you have more machines, more efficient machines, that some people who can afford it get all the machines, and the people, the laborers lose their jobs, and it affects adversely? I don't know.
Again, a very, very valid question. Thank you. The good news is no, it doesn't affect jobs. What it does is it takes away the grind of the labor. So instead of spending 10, 8, 9, 10 hours to get that small amount of gold, you will still need the mining. That's never going to go away. You will still need, people still want to get the gold, but it will reduce the amount of labor immensely. But the person who puts the sack in at the beginning will still get the gold out at the end. And each person knows their own sack, as it were, or their own number of sacks. And so there's a strong sense of ownership in the system. And so, you won't ever replace labor in terms of numbers. You will reduce labor hours. So, and that's the good news about all. People can see that. As soon as they see this equipment working, they say, we want it. Then they hear the price. And then they back off again. They realize this is not something I can afford. Going back to your thoughts about safety, you're very right. Safety, again, is a culture. I've used the word culture so many times this afternoon. And again, that takes time. This country, you would have seen the pictures of English contractor building sites 50 years ago. It would have looked exactly like what you're referring to. Nobody wearing the right clothing. And then slowly it takes time. And then companies pick it up and they say, right, we insist now that you will wear this clothing if you want to work with us. And you will be inducted and you will be trained. And these things, but they all take time. It's like recycling in this country. Some years ago, there was no such thing as recycling of our rubbish. Now there is. And so we just, it would be so much nicer if we could speed these things up. But yeah, there is that macho culture in mind. The women are not, though. The women you've seen in the pictures, they're not nearly so macho. They've got kids, they've got homes, they are much more tuned into safety. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go to Damon and then Alfred.
Yeah, I remember in your thesis that with the money that gold mining would bring to the region, it actually create social problems. And what is the church doing or in terms of social problems? What are those social problems and what is the church doing? What the church is doing?
Thank you, Damon. As you say, my thesis didn't dwell on this much any more than my presentation just has. The social problems are the same wherever sudden wealth, easy wealth can be made. And it's the same problems that you have with gamblers getting very rich. It's the same problem with prospectors finding that nugget of gold. It's the same problem of winning the lottery unexpectedly, is that sudden wealth, people can't really manage it. And so it then spills out into all kinds of antisocial behavior. And tell a quick story, but don't remind me of this. So I'm wandering around one of these gold fields and there's mining and people going everywhere. And there's this lady dressed immaculately in amongst all of this chaos. There's this wonderfully dressed lady. And I'm with my handlers, I'm never on my own. There's always somebody alongside me who's making sure that I don't do the wrong things, which was quite and so we come to this lady and people greet her and so on. And I said to her, gosh, you're really well dressed. It's unusual here. And people sort of blush at my compliment. And we walked away from her, and my friend said, she's a prostitute.
Oh my God, sorry.
I said, oh, okay, all right. And so she was there being a streetwalker, as it were, in the mining area. And yeah, I had no idea. She was there, she was so well dressed, and she was just hooking, whatever the expression is.
That's what they said, she's after you.
Anyway, so yeah, all those things happen. Drug addiction, alcohol, violence, domestic abuse, wife abuse, and the local churches do their level best to deal with all of these things. And the programs you're writing for Mining God's Way, it has built into them the whole idea of discipleship, more than just mining, but how do you live when you've got the goal? How are you a good parent? And how should we then live as miners with money? Thank you.
Al, go ahead.
Hi, Terry, thank you. After that story, my question was just right, actually. First of all, thank you so much. We've lived, as you said, your journey, and it's been so helpful. You've blessed us with just, the problems and things you've had all the way, and that's been such an encouragement. So thank you. And so that takes me to imagining you doing your interviews there. This might help some who are doing that sort of thing. I mean, how in that atmosphere and setup did you do these, and how did you structure these interviews? What were they like? I mean, how would you interview an Esther? And by the way, Esther, parenthesis, she would take that little bit of gold and she'd take it to a smelter. How did you cash that?
Oh, a dealer would appear immediately, a local dealer, and he would just simply weigh it with scales,
Yeah,
and the scales look like a cell phone.
that's it.
And you put them on a scale, and you
Yeah.
tell her what.
Okay, so
And she would get the money immediately. That's the last step before she gets paid.
So back to my question then, just imagining it again, asking you to help us, as you have done so much. Set up, I cannot imagine you asking Esther, would you mind if I just, here a second, I'll sit you down under this tree and chat to you. How did you do that, and how was the learning cycle for you that you didn't already know come out from these interviews?
Yeah, boy, you guys are asking good questions this afternoon. Thank you. And every one of them has got so many ways of answering them. So the first thing, the real thing, and this is in my methodology, part of my thesis, is a kind of a 4-stage building credibility. Right? I went in there and told everybody that my experiences in large-scale mining, I know nothing about your scale of mining. Treat me as an idiot who knows nothing. And I used to go underground with the guys, as you can imagine, and I'd be sitting there quietly, and just watching, and the guys would laugh at me. They would laugh, and I didn't mind that because I didn't mind being treated like the idiot at the beginning. And then one time I came out of the mine and somebody said something like, "Here comes," translated, "here comes sweaty Terry." And I thought, what? He said, "No, you are sweating like the rest of us." And I didn't realize, just by coming out drenched in sweat, give me some sort of credibility. You know what I mean? Sweaty Terry. And it's little things like that I took as being allowing me to move another stage forward. That the guys who need to identify with me. And just sitting there and watching the woman panning, talking to them, and that most people speak English in East Africa, as you can imagine. And so the English wasn't very powerful, but it was always enough. There were a few people who needed to be translated. So that was good. The second thing that I made fairly clear was that I was doing my research from a Christian perspective. And that I was, and so people related to them as well. My informants related
Christians among them.
Yeah.
I would have thought so in Africa.
And of course, that then leads us to the word snowballing and in the method. And yes, I would meet somebody who would then say, if this interests you, you should meet somebody. If this interests you, you should meet somebody. And so I kind of snowballed my way through the gold fields. But I also chose to interview high school teachers, local chiefs in the area, government officials, government geologists. You'd be pleased to have chatted to the local geologists in the area. Yeah. So I did try to go across the board of different kinds of people. I mean, a huge amount of stuff just never made it into my thesis, as you can imagine, but a lot of it did. And then just by this sort of, how can I say this, empathy, people began to open up. And they would, I mean, I heard some horrifying stories of abuse, that shouldn't have been told to me, really. That wasn't my angle. But people just felt comfortable enough to open up, that when I get home, my husband's going to take the money. And I'm afraid to go home with a lot of money, and I've got to get rid of the money now before I get home, that kind of thing. And so it was kind of scary in places too. But
Thanks.
trying to remember, Tom, can you remember the 4 stages that I went through?
Yeah, first you were the idiot,
The idiot.
and then you were useful idiot.
The useful idiot. Oh, yeah, you know some things. Yeah.
And then you became a friend or one of the group, and then the final stage was someone that they saw who could help.
A help.
And an aid and a much more of a peer kind of a framework. And that itself in practical theology, I thought was so significant because it's about discipleship. It's about becoming part of a community and that's what mission work strives to do. So many times we just say like strangers. Well, what is that process you go through? So it's really, we're gonna go with Chris and then to Jay.
Hey, Chris, nice to see you again.
Yeah, I appreciate so much what you just shared, and just it's cool, like Usha and other people talked about, like you track with other scholars in OCMS, and you only have these like links, where you can come in and actually look back and say, wow, this is what we've been working on this whole time. So it was very gratifying to see all that. One question I had for you is, I related to a lot of the research that you shared insofar as like my research is with auto rickshaw drivers, which is an industry that is similar to artisanal mining in the sense of you're dealing with a splintered population. A lot of people are living hand to mouth. They're often exploited, under-resourced. And the kind of trigger in my brain about my research was the one day in Bangalore when I saw these auto rickshaws that had this sign that said Peace Auto. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And come to find out, it was an initiative that was trying to introduce ethical practices into the workplace. And was resourcing them with things like magazine racks so customers could feel comfortable, or privacy curtains so that customers could feel safe. And the interesting sort of phenomenon that was the basis for my case study was this idea of like, why would auto rickshaw drivers willingly subordinate their professional conduct to join this union, knowing that they weren't going to profit from it? They were actually going to lose money by charging the actual government fares instead of negotiating higher rates. So all that is leading me to just ask you, I was tracking with you about like the training with artisanal miners and some of the initiatives to try and improve their lot and so I was just thinking, could like I know unionizing is sort of a bad word, but what is the sort of collective initiative that could bring these guys together where they could, resources can be provided in exchange for change of practice or building community where they can have affiliation and share hardships and things like that. Like in my case, it's this Pick Me application, in the Pick Me union, it's this whole online community, but I'm just curious, like, thinking about the solutions that would help these artisanal miners do mining God's way. Like, what is the mechanism that could do that?
Yeah, no, very, very helpful. Thank you. The word community was the very first question this afternoon, and that is exactly it. The folk are not too atomized, their situation is too diverse, for there to be any other approach. But there is a community peer pressure, which I know is there and I believe could be taken a bit further. And that is if we can get a good model mine, a good practice going in one place, that will allow people, we're going back to those three words that I talked about earlier, motivation, capability, and opportunity. And so we do need to zero in on community, and then that will have its own way of people seeing, oh, hang on, this is a good idea. This is making money. Let's do the same thing. Well, the word union is too strong for this world. The word cooperative is even too strong. I can't tell you how many thousands, if not millions of dollars have been spent by well-meaning NGOs to form cooperatives in the sector. And it just fails because gold is not a cooperative thing, you know. We may cooperate to grow cotton, to grow tea. We don't cooperate to mine gold. We just do it. And we all do it together. But the whole idea of a cooperative has absolutely failed over the last
Explain why that is. Is it because each person wants their little hope to find the big nugget, or?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and so they will work together on going underground. All the guys will be there together. The women will all work together. But what's mine is mine when it comes to gold and diamonds and this sort of area, lithium and cobalt. The word co-op just doesn't apply because there's not enough. How can I say this? A cooperative really works when different people have got different jobs within the same overall picture, right? Planting seed, growing seed, irrigating seed, harvesting it, and all of that. But this is so instantaneous. You start work in the morning, you've got your gold bead in the afternoon. No, there's no need to cooperate. You follow what I'm trying to say? There's no skill set here that you can't learn yourself. You just do it. As you saw, you just start digging on the ground with a hoe and a basin, or you go underground with your mates and you just start digging it underground. It's as simple as that.
But couldn't you like incentivize them to cooperate based on like things like that?
Oh, yeah, the mechanization. Yeah, we get
equipment.
we'll get there.
Like if you do certain things, then you can utilize equipment that'll make it faster for you to get.
And you all end up making more.
Yeah, that's the sort of the.
They will make more because they'll recover. What is hidden in my pictures is the sheer inefficiency. Those sacks and those mud and it's just whereas those bits of mechanization that I will introduce, even if it starts with the same amount of gold going in, they're just going to get more coming out. And they know.
Yeah, so to just comment on what was just said, the idea of delayed gratification, we talked about this before, plays into it, and that there's the motivation for that cooperative requires that we work today, but I get my reward later, sometime down the road, and that's a behavior or motivation that we need to be trained in. My question is different. So, Tom mentioned in his introduction that your work kind of brings together the vision of OCMS in a particular way, and the start of your talk to us this afternoon, you talked about how theology and mining are not naturally cooperative. And at least within the disciplines that the way they exist at present. And so by trying to draw the two together, you had to go through a particularly challenging process of developing a method of integrated research. And then since you've developed this process of integrative research, you've moved towards viable practices, the idea of actually impacting the world now. That strikes me quite significantly because of the tactical way you're going about doing this. My question for you is, two things, how would you lead somebody else through that process? Help bring about more projects like this? And the second is, in what other fields or to what other processes or problems or in what other industries do you see this sort of integrative research needing to be done?
Well, Now I'm silent. I usually have a very quick answer. It shows you that that's a good question. Thank you. How would I lead someone else? I think the short answer to that is that it would have to be on an ad hoc basis. My own thesis was so ad hoc, for want of a better word, that it's very hard to generalize out of that. But I'm sure that if somebody, for example, OCMS came in with the same kind of mishmash of ideas that I did, that someone like Tom or another faculty member would say, hey, hold on, there's a guy out there who walked through the same, if you'll excuse the pun, minefield to get to where he needed to go. And so that would be of great use for that. But otherwise, I suppose I'd have to go back to those various Bible colleges that turned me down and say, I've got my degree now. Do you have anyone studying practical theology? Would you like some help? and link it back to those colleges and the words practical theology and see if I could build up a help, a place to help people. Because the practical theology, that's why I referred to that so early on in my talk. That was particularly important to help. Once I got that 4-stage model, I could then do my research, not my thesis. The thesis is separate. That's an argument. It took me forever to get my argument, but it didn't take long to start doing the research. And practical theology is a very good research tool. Yeah. Of course, it can't help you with your thesis. That's your problem.
Okay, we'll go with grade 2. Then
So,
Brian, and
yes,
then-
thank you, Terry, for your talk.
Second question later.
Yes, I still remember your Viva because I was a chairperson.
You were, sir.
And I was more nervous than you because first online Viva.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so really very fun. At the very beginning of your presentation today, you mentioned about the model of practical theology by Swinton and Watt. And the second phrase is about identifying contextual factors. Contextual factors means that you have to identify factors from all different dimensions of the context, not only from the cultural dimension, but also social dimension, religious dimension, even political dimension as well. But your methodology is ethnography, which means you have to focus on people's cultural belief and behavior. And that limits your scope only to remain in the cultural dimension. So there is a tension here between your desire to go over the cultural dimension to explore different kind of dimensions to identify contextual factors. Yet, your methodology is pulling you back to the cultural dimension. So how do you handle this tension in your research, in your study?
I had to, as you say, within culture, and when I talked about culture earlier, I kept it as a very broad strokes, what we mean by culture, referring to Hofstadter. But you're quite right. Once I was able to get into what I needed to do and get it more fully, I then did focus in on the two words, the next two words I used further down were ordinary theology. And so then I then focused in on people's ordinary theology within their whole cultural milieu. And so I had to bring it down to something that people could answer questions on that were, and so as I was going into my field work, there was a lady here in those days called Iram Sarwa, and Iram was very helpful with preparing me for field work in terms of the sociological, anthropological way of setting up the questions to do with practical theology within their world. And you're quite right. I didn't ask questions about. I mean, I picked it up, and I didn't research education. I didn't research the role of government in all of this. I didn't research the role of tradition in all of this. I didn't do any of that side of it. I did eventually just get them to talk about their thoughts and beliefs about God and mining. And so I did narrow culture down to that. And that's why I mentioned ordinary theology being such a breakthrough for me. Because once I got to ordinary theology, I realized I could ask hard questions about people's ordinary theologies. They didn't have to be theologians, they just had to be willing to talk. And that was so important.
Okay, Brent, and then Jeff has the last question.
All right, mine's an easy one. It's kind of following up with what Tom was talking about in his initial question about these organizations being secular. And so do you feel like, even though your topic clearly has God in the title, that their interest in it is this justice and human flourishing, and they're willing to subsecular organizations, if you acknowledge being a Christian, they immediately kind of stonewall you, but they're willing to put up with you in that sense because they feel like you're onto something that others haven't gotten to in terms of the justice, human flourishing side?
First of all, the big organizations like United Nations Environment Program and the World Bank have now acknowledged they've hit a brick wall with this world, the sector.
Okay.
And so I had a very in-depth conversation at the end of last year, and the beginning of this year, with an authority from the World Bank on explaining that they had hit this deadlock. And I think also the Artisanal Gold Council have also picked up on that. They didn't say that to me directly,
Right.
but I think that they've realized that after tens of millions of dollars
Oh my goodness.
and,
Wow.
and decades of no progress, they have a problem. Secondly, the word faith now is creeping back into the media and into these big organizations. Call yourself a Christian, they don't write you off, they just lump you into the world of faith. Oh, you're a faith-based NGO. Oh, you have a faith-based approach. Oh, so you're a believer. And they're not discounting that anymore. They've also realized that
So there has been a shift.
there's been a shift. That
Yeah.
faith-based approaches have validity.
Okay.
They're not that keen to fund you, they're not that keen to put you in. You're not in the fold, but you can run alongside.
Okay.
And so the word faith has replaced, is now it's more inclusive.
Jeff.
Well, my wife Jan, who was associated with OCMS for a number of years, came home one day, it was about 2011, and said, there's this chap, there's Terry, who's a Zimbabwean. I thought, oh, Terence Ranger, that was her model tutor. Well, it should have been the other way around, that she should be his model tutor, that's another story. Anyway, Jan was an anthropologist, medical and social, and also a trained Salvation Army officer. And she introduced me to Terry, and we started talking about things in common in Zimbabwe. But then I told him about how I've been to Nigeria, and your comments on community are quite informative. They blend in with my experiences of living in a community, total immersion, how you were accepted bit by bit into a community. And the acceptance is mainly due to mistakes, like not going to see the head man, and refusing to eat meat that's gone off for about a day, and you can smell it a mile away for lunch. But went back to Nigeria on a project looking at artisanal mining, and we were looking at the artisanal mining of coal, galena, sphalerite. Sapphires, gemstones up north, and there's also a big gold field up north where they've had distinct mercury problems, polluted the local water supply. But I was also in Tanzania looking at the Lake Victoria gold mine belt, looking at groundwater there, and looking at the impact upon mining by Australian companies there, and there was no major problems with cyanide and mercury. I'm assuming that your job in Kenya, or the area you studied in Kenya, was at the far eastern end of the Lake Victoria gold belt.
Absolutely, it was the same gold belt that curves around Victoria, from Rwanda right around.
But what you find is that I'm sure that, I mean, same as in Zimbabwe, was that the only reason that you have an artisanal mining group is because they're reworking all mine workings, and stuff that's left behind, or just bits and pieces that just happen to be an outcrop.
Yeah, well, the thing is, they are attracted to the area by the workings of the colonial era.
Yes.
But they are now finding all their own gold seams in fields and
agreed.
everything.
But so at the present time, when they're working these small deposits, presumably it's seasonal work. Yeah.
No.
No,
No, it's happening all the time, as long as there's not too much rain. Of course, if you are in an old working, like you just.
yeah, then it gets flooded.
Then it gets flooded.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if it's a sunny day,
Oh,
they're
they're
at
done,
work.
yeah. Yeah, because in when I was in Nigeria looking at these gemstone mines, there was hardly anybody there because everybody's out in the fields growing their crops. I can see that there could be a sort of combination between agriculture and mining. And that being much more sustainable in that they mine during the drought and they grow crops during the wet season. You see that at all?
I don't know enough about the rest of the world. I'm sure that does occur in other places.
Yeah.
But what we're looking at here, and we go back to Jeff's comment about instant gratification, is that if you can get £5 at the end of today, then do it, irrespective of everything else. And your cousin, your sister is doing the farming.
I'm working on
You're spending the day on the mine.
working on the principle that's the downside when you did a grow yams and sell yams, that it just to hack away at a chunk of rock at about 50 meters down.
It is easier, but you've got to wait a lot longer to get the money.
Not if you go to the local market, it's 4 days a week in Nigeria.
It's the whole growing season, and that's the problem with this. Mining is similar to fishing. The fish are in the lake, you get in your boat, you go, you fish, you come home again, you sell the fish, you've got the money. And you don't worry about tomorrow because the fish will be there tomorrow.
Talking about it's a downside easier. If you hacking away at a lump of gold, it's okay when you can see the gold. But when it's disseminated, you have a bigger problem.
Yeah, but that's where the women are coming into their hose and looking. But yeah, no, you're right. I don't know enough to be able to be categorical about it. But my experience is that farming and mining are happening simultaneously.
Well, looking at the impact of God and religion, upon these societies. Yes, they've all, the first thing we had to do in the place that we went to in Orju with the Garde people was to attend the Sunday morning services. If you went to the local language one, it was 3 hours long, and if you went to the English one, it was 1 hour long. But we sort of ended up as being part of the community. Okay, and we just had to do it, and we ended up being part of the community. But when it comes to a mining community, have you ever drawn any parallels with, say, the South Wales mining community, which was extremely religious and led to all sorts of non-conformist ideas amongst the Methodist and Presbyterian churches of South Wales, and they got away from the Catholic and the Church of England ideas.
This will be the last answer. Thanks for figuring it out, by the way. No, in that you're right. There's the Christianity in these areas is highly splintered into many different churches, many different meetings, many different self-styled bishops, many different ways of worshiping. But the problem is that it tends to be Sundays we go to church, Sundays we do the right things, and then we go back to work again, either that afternoon or on Monday. And the issue is integrating, which is really what Mining God's Way is trying to do, is integrating the faith that comes up on Sunday and the love of God and the love of each other into how do we then live and how do we work. And so that is the big issue.
With that, we will draw this to a close and tie a ribbon on it. I actually did find the sequence, and actually, I mined for sermons. So Terry was in a sermon, but it came from your lecture. And the first one was the stranger.
Yeah.
All right. And the second one was the fool. And he was known as Mr. I'm Fine. Because they were worried about him. I'm fine. And then it was the learner, the man who knows and can be trusted. Okay, and the final one was the partner and friend who they've been divided. And one of the things it just struck me is that's what good mission is. When you move from stranger to friend, and then that's what Jesus did in the incarnation. That he moved to, and that last phrase where he says, I call you now friends. And I think that's just true of what goes around this table, what goes on in the center, and why OCMS is such an important place for research. Because we're more than just researchers who are finding scholarship for friends. Thank you, Terry, for an excellent presentation. And the lecture next week is myself.
Yeah, the hooking up.